What his attraction to you reveals about his shadow. Have you ever stopped to think why that man was irresistibly attracted to you? It wasn't just her smile, her beauty, or her charming personality. The truth is much deeper and more disturbing than you might think. Carl Jung discovered something that most people prefer to ignore. The attraction someone feels for you is a direct mirror of the darkest and most hidden parts of that person's soul. That overwhelming passion, that inexplicable obsession, or even that cruel indifference you can't understand. All of this reveals the inner demons, the repressed desires, and the unhealed wounds he carries in his unconscious. What he sees in you is not really you. It is the projection of what he most fears, desires, or rejects in himself. In this video, you'll discover the psychological secrets behind male attraction and how to decode what his behavior really says about the dark world he hides. Get ready. This journey will forever change the way you see relationships. 1. The invisible mirror. How you become its shadow. When a man looks at you and feels that inexplicable attraction, something far beyond consciousness is happening. Carl Jung called a shadow everything that a person rejects, denies, or hides from himself. They are the characteristics, emotions, and desires that were pushed into the basement of the unconscious because society, family, or that person's own beliefs said that it was wrong, weak, or inadequate. And here's the disturbing secret. You become the perfect mirror of these hidden parts. Imagine a man who grew up believing that sensitivity is weakness. He built a tough, controlled, and rational personality. But deep down, locked in his unconscious, there is a part of him that is vulnerable, emotional, and lacking in affection. When he knows you, and you express these qualities naturally, something inside him awakens. He's not just attracted to you as a person. It is being magnetically pulled by the very rejected part of yourself that sees reflected in you. This dynamic works like a psychological magnet. The more he has repressed a certain characteristic, the stronger will be the attraction to someone who manifests it freely. If he has buried his creativity to follow a safe and conventional path, he will be fascinated by an artistic and free woman. If he has hidden his need for deep emotional connection behind a facade of independence, he will find himself irresistibly attracted to someone who seeks genuine intimacy. The problem is that this projection-based attraction is neither sustainable nor healthy. He's not really seeing you. You are seeing an idealized version that fills the void left by the parts of yourself that you have abandoned. This explains why so many relationships start with intense passion and then fall apart. When the person's reality becomes clear and does not correspond perfectly to the projection, disappointment is inevitable. You notice this when he starts criticizing the very thing that attracted him in the first place. The free woman he loved is now seen as irresponsible. The sensitivity that enchanted him now irritates him. This is because he has never integrated these qualities into himself. You keep rejecting that part of your shadow, and when you stop being the perfect mirror, the illusion shatters. Jung believed that true growth happens when a person recognizes and integrates their shadow, but most people prefer to project it onto others. It's easier to fall in love with someone who represents what you don't have the courage to be than to do the inner work of becoming whole. That's why so many people jump from relationship to relationship, always looking for someone to fill the void that can only be filled from the inside out. Understanding this dynamic gives you immense power. You start to notice when someone is in love with you for real or just for the projection they make on you. The difference is in that person's ability to accept you completely, including the parts that don't fit their unconscious fantasy. 2. The idealized woman. When he falls in love with a fantasy. Jung identified in the male unconscious an archetypal figure called anima. It represents the inner feminine side of every man, formed by experiences with female figures throughout life, especially the mother, but also influenced by culture, art, and collective imagination. This internal image works as an invisible mold that determines who he will be attracted to. When you come into his life and fit into this mold, even partially, the attraction is immediate and overwhelming. The problem begins when his anima is completely divorced from reality. Some men carry such an idealized image of the perfect woman that no real person can live up to it. This imaginary woman is always understanding, but never demands anything. She is independent, but always available. She is strong, but never challenges you. She is sensual but never threatens you. It exists only in fantasy because real life is made up of contradictions, complexities, and imperfections. When a man projects this idealized image onto you, the relationship begins magically. He puts you on a pedestal, treats you like you're special in a way that no one else is. You may feel like you've finally found someone who truly sees you. But the painful truth is that he's not seeing you. He sees his anima dressed with his face and body. This dynamic explains why some men seem to fall in love instantly. It's not real love. It is the unconscious recognition of the inner image that they carry. They feel like they've known you for years, even though they've just met you. They talk about destiny and the connection of souls, but that sense of familiarity comes from projection, not genuine connection with who you really are. The collapse of this illusion is inevitable and often brutal. The moment you act inconsistently with his fantasy, the disappointment begins. If his anima is an ethereal goddess and you show human vulnerability, he feels betrayed. If his internal image demands a surrogate mother and you set healthy boundaries, he accuses you of coldness. The same person who adored you can now despise you, not because you have changed, but because the fantasy has fallen apart. Jung warned that a man needs to develop a conscious relationship with his anima. This means recognizing that this internal image is not a real person, but a part of himself that needs to be integrated. When this does not happen, he continues to seek outside himself the completeness that can only come from within. He goes from relationship to relationship, always disillusioned, always blaming women for not being who he imagined. Tragedy is on both sides. For him, it's the chronic inability to genuinely connect with a real person. For you, it's being loved for who you're not, and then rejected for being who you really are. Recognizing this dynamic early on can save you years of suffering trying to live up to an impossible picture. Sometimes it isn't love that keeps you tied to him. It's the pattern your mind still hasn't understood. Learn how to break it inside the Jung Method. Link pinned in the first comment. 3. Magnetic attraction, the power of repressed opposites. There is a powerful psychological force that Jung described as the attraction to repressed opposites. When a man systematically denies certain qualities in himself, these characteristics do not disappear. They accumulate in the unconscious, gaining energy and power. The more he fights against a part of himself, the stronger he becomes in the shadows. And then you appear, naturally expressing what he has spent his whole life stifling, and the attraction is magnetic, almost irresistible. Think of an extremely controlled and organized man. Your whole life is structured, planned, predictable. He has built this rigid personality as a defense against the chaos he fears. But the chaotic, spontaneous, and unpredictable part of it did not die. It is alive in the unconscious, waiting. When he meets someone free, spontaneous, and carefree, he feels an attraction that he cannot explain rationally. It's not just romantic interest. It is his own soul crying out for balance, for integration of what has been rejected. This dynamic explains why people with seemingly incompatible personalities attract each other so intensely. The extreme introvert falls in love with the vibrant extrovert. The cold intellectual is fascinated by the deeply emotional woman. The submissive and complacent man finds himself attracted to someone dominant and assertive. It's no coincidence. It is the psyche desperately seeking what is missing, trying to become complete through the other. But here's the trap that destroys countless relationships. This initial attraction based on repressed opposites carries a ticking time bomb. In the first moments, there is fascination and excitement. He admires in you exactly what he cannot express in himself. You represent freedom, passion, vulnerability, or strength that he secretly wants to possess. However, as the coexistence deepens, what once fascinated begins to threaten. The controlled man who has fallen in love with your spontaneity begins to try to control you. What attracted him now makes him anxious and insecure. He wants you to continue to be free, but within safe limits that he sets. The intellectual who loved his emotionality begins to criticize his tears and his sensitivity. The same quality that magnetized him is now seen as weakness or manipulation. This is because he has not yet made peace with this part of himself. Jung understood that relationships based purely on this attraction of opposites are unstable. They can work temporarily, creating a sense of completeness where each person fills in what is lacking in the other. But this puts an impossible weight on the relationship. You become responsible for expressing not only who you are, but also the repressed part of it. And when you fail in that impossible role, or when he finally confronts his own dark side through you, repulsion replaces attraction. The only healthy resolution is when he stops projecting his repressed opposites onto you and begins to integrate them into himself. This means accepting that he can also be spontaneous at times, that he can also feel deep emotions, that he can also be vulnerable. When this happens, the attraction transforms. It ceases to be that desperate and magnetic need and becomes something more stable, more real, more sustainable. He starts to admire you for who you are, not for what you represent of his internal world. 4. Fear, disguised as desire, why it chases you or avoids you. The shadow does not contain only repressed desires. It also holds our deepest fears and the parts of ourselves that we consider dangerous or destructive. When a man feels intensely attracted to you, it's often not just pure desire, it is fear disguised as attraction. And this fear can manifest itself in two extreme ways. It haunts you obsessively or avoids you with the same intensity. Stalking happens when you act out something that threatens the psychological framework they've built to feel safe. Perhaps you express a freedom that terrifies you because if he allowed himself to feel the same, his whole carefully controlled life would fall apart. Perhaps you display an emotional intensity that he fears in himself. So he pursues you, not to conquer you, but to control, dominate, or possess that which frightens him. If he manages to get you under control, he will symbolically be controlling his own fear. This type of attraction is dangerous because it has nothing to do with love or genuine connection. It's about power and control over one's own inner shadows. He can seem passionate, intense, dedicated, but beneath the surface lies a despair that is not romantic. It is the desperation of someone running away from themselves, trying to resolve an internal conflict through another person. The more you resist, the more he pursues, because resistance only amplifies the challenge of mastering that which threatens him. On the other hand, fear can also manifest as extreme avoidance. Some men feel such a strong attraction to you that it completely terrifies them. They realize, even if unconsciously, that getting closer to you means confronting parts of themselves that they have spent their lives avoiding. It means feeling vulnerability, intense emotions, loss of control, or exposure of weaknesses. So they run away. They create emotional distance. They act coldly or indifferently when in fact they are fighting an overwhelming attraction. These men often send mixed signals. They approach intensely and then disappear. They show deep interest and then act as if you mean nothing. This confusing behavior is not necessarily conscious manipulation. It is the inner conflict between the desire for connection and the terror of what that connection represents. Their shadow is screaming to come closer, but the conscious ego is erecting walls of protection. Jung believed that our greatest fears often point to our greatest growth potentials. The man who is terrified of emotional vulnerability is exactly the one who most needs to develop it. The man who runs away from genuine intimacy is the one whose soul most longs for it. But as long as those fears remain unconscious and unintegrated, they will continue to control his behavior in ways that even he doesn't understand. Recognizing this dynamic protects you from misinterpreting his behavior. Persecution is not proof of love. Avoidance is not proof of indifference. Both can be manifestations of the same phenomenon, the deep fear of what you represent to his internal world. And as long as he doesn't do the work of confronting and integrating these shadows, no relationship will be possible. He will continue to run away from himself, whether through obsessive persecution or protective avoidance, but always running away from the only person he really needs to face, himself. 5. The childhood wound, how his past defines who he chooses. Carl Jung deeply understood how childhood experiences shape not only our conscious personality, but especially our shadow. Every unhealed wound, every unmet need, every emotional trauma of childhood becomes part of the unconscious stuff that determines who we are attracted to in adulthood. When a man feels that inexplicable attraction to you, It's often because you've activated an old wound he's carried since childhood. These wounds function as invisible psychological magnets. A man who grew up with an emotionally distant mother will be magnetically attracted to emotionally unavailable women. Not because he consciously wants to suffer, but because his unconscious is trying to resolve that original wound. It's as if the psyche says, "This time it will be different. This time I'll get the love I didn't have." But the choice is already bound to repeat the same painful pattern. The wound of abandonment creates a specific type of attraction. Men who have experienced emotional or physical abandonment in childhood develop a shadow filled with desperate need and terror of being left. They are attracted to people who they unconsciously perceive as potentially unavailable or prone to leaving. This may seem like self-sabotage, but it's actually the unconscious attempt to master the original trauma by reliving it under new circumstances. The wound of rejection, on the other hand, works differently. A boy who felt that he was never good enough, that his efforts were never recognized or valued, grows up with a shadow full of shame and inadequacy. This man is often attracted to women who are critical, demanding, or impossible to satisfy. Again, it is not conscious masochism. It is the unconscious trying to finally prove its worth to the inner figure that has always rejected it. There is also the wound of engulfment. Some men have grown up with suffocating, controlling, or emotionally invasive mother figures. They have developed a shadow that associates intimacy with loss of identity and freedom. These men are initially attracted to deep connection, but then experience panic and the need for escape. They want closeness but fear being consumed, so they choose partners who either allow excessive distance or, paradoxically, are so engaging that they justify their fear and need to escape. The wound of invisibility deeply marks some men. Those who grew up feeling that they didn't matter, that their needs were ignored, that they were just an obligation for their caregivers. These men are often attracted to people who put them on the back burner, who don't prioritize them, who exactly repeat the pattern of emotional neglect. There is a comfortable familiarity in this pain, however contradictory it may seem. What makes this dynamic particularly cruel is that these wounds operate completely outside of consciousness. Man does not know that he is repeating old patterns. He genuinely believes that his choices are based on natural attraction, chemistry, or compatibility. But Jung knew that until these wounds are brought into the light of consciousness and integrated, they will continue to control partner choices and sabotage healthy relationships. You may notice when you are dealing with someone operating from unhealed wounds. The patterns are repeated in all of his relationships. He tells stories from the past where he has always been the victim of the same dynamics. He cannot identify his own participation in the creation of these patterns. And more importantly, he is attracted to you precisely because of the qualities that will end up hurting him in the same way he was hurt before. 6. The dark side of obsession, when attraction turns into possession. There is a point where the attraction crosses an invisible line and turns into something much darker. Jung recognized that when the shadow is not consciously integrated, it can manifest itself in increasingly destructive ways. Obsession is one of these manifestations, where you stop being a real person to him and become an object that represents everything that is missing in his fragmented psyche. Obsession happens when a man projects not only some qualities of the shadow onto you, but all your possibility of completeness, happiness, and meaning. You become the answer to all your inner problems. If he manages to possess you completely, he believes that he will finally feel whole. This belief is totally unconscious, but it directs his every thought and action. You are no longer a person with your own life, desires, and autonomy. You are the missing piece in the puzzle of his soul. This type of attraction is easily confused with deep love or intense passion. He thinks about you constantly. He cannot concentrate on other areas of life. He wants to know where you are, who you are with, what you are doing at any given moment. It may seem romantic at first, as if you are the most important thing in the world to him. But genuine love liberates, while obsession imprisons. The crucial difference is in the way he reacts to his autonomy. True love celebrates your individuality, your separate interests, your friendships, your moments alone. Obsession does not tolerate any of this. Every part of your life that doesn't include it is seen as a threat or rejection. He doesn't want to know you deeply as a real and complex person. He wants to consume you, absorb you, merge you completely with him until there is no more separation. Jung understood that this psychological fusion is the opposite of individuation, which is the process of becoming who we really are. The obsession hinders both his growth and yours. He gets caught up in the fantasy that complete union will bring salvation. You get stuck trying to match an impossible image, or if you resist, dealing with the intensity of his reaction when the fantasy is threatened. The most dangerous side of this dynamic is that obsession often goes hand in hand with possessiveness and control. If you are the source of all its completeness, then to lose you would be to lose everything. This unconscious belief generates a deep terror that manifests itself as extreme jealousy, constant vigilance, and the need to control every aspect of your life. He doesn't do it out of love. You do it out of desperation to keep intact the projection that turned you into the savior of his fragmented soul. Some obsessions are born out of a shadow particularly charged with anger, resentment, or revenge against women. Perhaps he was deeply wounded in the past and never processed that pain. Then all that unintegrated negative energy settles on you. Obsession in this case carries a punitive quality. He wants to conquer you to prove something, to take symbolic revenge on those who hurt him, to finally have power over the feminine who previously hurt him. Acknowledging obsession early on can literally save your life, not just emotionally but sometimes physically. The signs are there: disproportionate intensity too soon, difficulty accepting limits, need for immediate answers, restlessness when you are not available, invasive questions disguised as interest. This is not love. It is an unintegrated shadow using you as a container for everything that is fragmented within it. 7. Indifference as a defense. What he hides when he feels nothing. Not every manifestation of the shadow is dramatic or intense. Sometimes it reveals itself through its exact opposite: absolute indifference. When a man seems unable to feel genuine attraction, when nothing seems to touch him emotionally, when he goes through life keeping all connections on the surface, this is also the shadow at work. Jung would call this a psyche that has protected itself so completely from its own depths that it has lost access to its own feelings. This indifference is not an absence of emotion. It's a massive defense against emotions that are perceived as too threatening to feel. Often these men experience something in childhood or adolescence that taught them that feeling is dangerous. Perhaps vulnerability has been punished, love has been used as a weapon, or emotional openness has resulted in betrayal or abandonment. So the psyche built walls so high and thick that now nothing can get through them. When this man meets you, even if you are extraordinary, even if you offer exactly what he should theoretically want, he feels almost nothing. There is perhaps an intellectual interest, an aesthetic appreciation, but no real emotional spark. That doesn't mean you're not attractive or valuable. It means that his ability to feel genuine attraction is locked behind the defenses that his shadow has erected. The most tragic thing is that these men are often unaware of what they have lost. They believe that they are simply rational, practical people who are not emotional by nature. They build an entire identity around this emotional disconnection, sometimes even being proud of it. They say that they don't get carried away by silly feelings, that they keep a cool head, that they are realistic. But Jung knew that this is neither strength nor wisdom. It is fragmentation. It is a part of the human soul being held prisoner in the shadows. Relationships with such men are peculiarly empty. Everything may seem to work on the surface. He is present, reliable, perhaps even thoughtful in practical ways. But it lacks life. It lacks depth. It lacks that feeling of being really seen and desired. You may feel lonely, even though you are next to him. It is as if there were an invisible wall that prevents true intimacy. Indifference can also be selective. Some men can feel attraction, but only for people or situations that are impossible or inappropriate. They are only interested in those who are committed, those who live far away, those who are completely incompatible. When someone available and suitable appears, they feel nothing. This reveals a shadow that associates love with impossibility. The only sure way to desire is to desire what you cannot have, because then you will never have to face the terror of true intimacy. There is also the man who feels indifference as punishment. He learned that withdrawing emotion and attention is a powerful form of control. When you don't act as he wants, he suddenly becomes cold, distant, emotionally absent. It's not that he really stopped feeling. It's just that using indifference as a weapon has become part of how your shadow manipulates relationships. What he hides is not the absence of feelings, but anger and the need for power that he cannot express directly. Jung believed that regaining access to one's feelings requires immense courage. It means dismantling defenses that were built for good reasons. It means feeling everything that has been avoided for years or decades. It means confronting the original wounds that made the emotion dangerous in the first place. Few men are willing to do this work. It's easier to remain indifferent, blaming circumstances or others for the inability to genuinely connect. 8. Integrating the shadow. How to recognize genuine attraction versus projection. After understanding all the ways the shadow distorts attraction and relationships, the crucial question arises: how to recognize when attraction is genuine. How do you tell the difference between a man who really sees you and one who's just casting his shadow on you? Jung dedicated his life to this process of shadow integration, and his insights offer a map for navigating these complex waters. Genuine attraction starts with his ability to see you as a separate and complete person, not as an extension or complement of him. He demonstrates real curiosity about who you are, not just how you fit into his needs or fantasies. It asks questions that go beyond the surface. Remember details you shared. More importantly, he can accept when your answers don't match what he imagined, without being disappointed or trying to change you. A man who has integrated his shadow can recognize his own projections. He may say things like, "I realized I was putting unrealistic expectations on you," or "I recognize that this is my problem to solve, not yours." Such self-awareness is rare and precious. It shows that he is doing the inner work of getting to know himself, including the parts that are not pleasant to recognize. He doesn't use you as a canvas to project what he hasn't solved on himself. Emotional stability is another important indicator. Men operating primarily from the shadow tend to oscillate between extremes: idealization and devaluation, persecution and abandonment, intensity and indifference. Someone who has done the integration work demonstrates more balance. He manages to maintain consistent interest without obsession, can handle conflict without extreme drama. It manages to give space without disappearing completely. Also notice how he deals with his qualities that challenge him. If you are spontaneous and he is controlled, a man with integrated shadow may initially feel discomfort, but responds with curiosity and openness to grow. He may even say that you inspire him to be more flexible, but without holding you responsible for changing him. In contrast, man operating from the shadow will react by trying to control you or criticizing the very thing that initially attracted him. The way he talks about past relationships also reveals a lot. If all exes are characterized as villains or victims, if he never acknowledges his own participation in problems, if patterns repeat themselves but he always blames other people, this indicates a lack of shadow integration. Someone who has done internal work can look at the past with nuance, recognizing both the mistakes of others and their own, learning from each experience. Genuine attraction also manifests itself in healthy reciprocity. He values your autonomy as much as his. It encourages your separate interests, your friendships, your individual growth. He understands that two whole individuals create a deeper connection than two desperate halves trying to merge. There is no need for fusion because there is no inner void that you need to fill. Jung said that individuation, the process of becoming whole, never ends completely. Even people who have done a lot of internal work still have shadows they still cast occasionally. The difference is the speed with which they recognize and correct these projections. A man who is aware of his inner journey realizes when he is reacting to you from old wounds, when he is seeing in you something that is actually his, and he is able to take responsibility for it. The final question is not to find someone without shade, which would be impossible. It is to find someone committed to the continuous process of knowing, accepting, and integrating one's shadow. This man will still have moments of projection, but he will also have the courage to look inside and make the necessary adjustments. He will understand that you are not here to heal him, complete him, or save him. You're here to share a journey between two whole people who choose to connect, not because they have to, but because they genuinely want to. This is the difference between a relationship built on shadow projections and a relationship built on a real and sustainable foundation.